We believe the internet is the most powerful tool for human progress the world has ever seen. Continuously created by all and governed by none. A global commons that ensures access for everyone. What it enables is nothing short of magic. We believe the internet must remain a space where ideas are born and perspectives are challenged. Where collaboration drives inspiration and debate fuels ingenuity. Where technology empowers creators to unleash innovation at a pace never before imagined. To reach beyond what is possible today. We believe technology that reimagines the way digital teams work sparks humanity's drive to achieve and advance. When we come together to make the internet, we are building the future, turning inspiration into action, freeing us to create experiences that accelerate change and unlock extraordinary performance, kindling our passion to push limits, to explore, to discover, to disregard the status quo and embrace new possibilities in our relentless pursuit of better.
Thank you all. It is a pleasure to be with you at DrupalCon Barcelona. We're having a wonderful time, aren't we? It's been a great yesterday and great today. Raise your hand if you're having a good DrupalCon. Oh, excellent. Okay, so a few people dissatisfied, but no. My name is Josh. I'm a co-founder of Pantheon. I'm very pleased to be here to introduce today's keynote speaker. You may know Pantheon as a wonderful, performance, secure, GDPR-compliant Drupal host, and we're proud to do that. I think we have the best dang hosting in the world. But the truth is, if we are the best, it's only by about this much. There's a bunch of other great Drupal hosts. Many of them are sponsors here. What we do that's different and unique, I think, is we help teams work differently. We transform the way people operate websites with what we call website operations. That helps teams move much faster and be much more productive, continuing to innovate and iterate on what the website is and does that keeps it fresh and relevant. I was just writing a retrospective on Drupal 7 that I'm going to publish next week, and thinking about how we've had customers that they're still running Drupal 7. They've been running this Drupal 7 website for 10 years, and it's evolved with them as they've grown. And that approach to Drupal that keeps it alive and relevant helps make it a good long-term investment for all of our clients. So we love to help teams work that way. We love to help teams who are working on large Drupal portfolios. Another thing we do, I think, uniquely. So anyway, if you want to learn more about Pantheon, you can talk to us downstairs. You know where we are. You can get a t-shirt. I want to introduce Theódór to talk about security, which is such a huge part of what it takes to be a responsible citizen on the internet. He knows it backwards and forwards. He's lived it. In fact, he got arrested and put in jail for hacking websites. So take it from a true expert. Theódór's got a great presentation, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Hi everyone, it's great to be with you here today, with all of you. My name is Theódór Ragnar Gíslason, and I'm the founder of Defend Iceland, which is a community-driven bug bounty initiative with a nationwide mandate. All of our digital services for the entire country are in scope. You can find a bug in all of them, and you can report it to us. But before going into that, I wanted to share the story of how this project came to be. I was arrested, not put in jail, was arrested though, and arrested for computer crimes at the age of 16. This was way back in the year 1997, and I was sound asleep at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, like the productive hacker I was at the time. I was arrested and handcuffed in front of my parents. They took all my computer equipment, and I was taken to the police station. To say that I was shocked is an understatement. So how did I get there? Well, I guess that's an interesting story and a journey I'd like to take you through. It all started a few years before, when I was 14 years old and a school bus drove over me. I fell under the two back tires and I almost died due to the broken bones and internal injuries and bleeding I suffered. I went from being a very active 13-year-old kid, busy doing sports and hanging out with my friends, into someone who was in a wheelchair and had crutches for close to 2 years while I was recovering. My parents went through hell at this time, having to deal with like someone who was like always whining because of the pain and all of those sorts of things. But they never let me see that they were upset with me at the time. And and this is me at the hospital. When I was released from the hospital, I had a catheter and I had to use a wheelchair for most of the time. I couldn't do any of the things I had been doing before. And what I did have, though, was a lot of free time and energy. I mean, I didn't have to go to school. I just didn't know what to do with my time. But before the accident, I had already, that's my first computer. It's a 486, 33 megahertz, 200 megabyte hard drive. And I already gotten this computer and I'd installed Linux and Slackware, if any old Linux people in here. And I became addicted to the internet, and hacking became my outlet. And that's where I found my place and my community. I was hooked. Hacking became my world. I was always connected to the internet. Dialing up through a modem, those screeching sounds of a dial-up connection became the soundtrack of my life. It drove my parents crazy. No one could make or receive calls from our home. And let's not even talk about the phone bills. They were astronomical. I told you I had parents that were very supportive. Eventually, though, I managed to set up a leased line to have 24/7 internet access, and it even began providing internet services to friends who needed IRC bots. It was a new frontier, and I was hooked. Now, let me tell you something, that hacking back then wasn't what it is today. It was a wild, uncharted territory, and I dove in headfirst. I became an active part of hacker groups like ADM, WooWoo, and Tezo. This was my community, a group of like-minded individuals who were passionate about exploring the digital world's unknowns. I loved it. I wanted to prove my talent, my worth, and at the time, I effectively had zero boundaries. You could even say that from the age of 15 to 18, I was probably a pretty dangerous individual. Script kiddie might be a good term as well. But I never hacked for money, and I never targeted individuals. I only hacked into things or broke into things because I was curious or because there was some sort of challenge or the potential of some prestige among my peers. I was up all night finding vulnerabilities and writing exploits to share among those peers. And one of those vulnerabilities and exploits I had written was for a format string vulnerability in a printer service used in almost every Linux distribution at the time. I had written a very capable and effective exploit that even had brute force capabilities to find the correct offset for the instruction pointer. And it turns out, though, that some malicious hackers decided to take my exploit and create an internet worm called Ramen that broke into thousands of Linux servers all over the world. Even NASA. NASA was hacked with an exploit I had written to impress my peers over a weekend, just having fun coding. It was a big realization for me in that even though I wasn't personally hacking into servers directly, other malicious hackers might use my exploits to cause damage, which could affect people's lives. Over time, and obviously having been arrested, that kind of helped too, I realized I had been extremely immature throughout my hacking career, extremely immature. And I needed to turn the tables somehow. I had become a pretty capable hacker, but as I mentioned, I'd made a lot of stupid mistakes in my youth. And in fact, I was extremely lucky to have been arrested in Iceland and not someplace else, as my life probably would have been over if that would have been the case. I'm acutely aware how lucky I was to have lived in Iceland at the time. It's a place where the follies of youth doesn't necessarily mean your life is over. That did happen to many of my hacker friends who had made similar errors of judgment and paid the price, and some even took their own lives as a result. I wanted to atone for it somehow and in some way. I wanted to use my talents as a force for good and actually improve or effect some positive change. And with that mindset is how I began my professional hacking career, with a goal of making up for the folly of my youth, or at least that was the hope. I eventually co-founded the cybersecurity company Syndis back in 2013, and there I found an outlet and a way to hopefully have an impact, a positive impact. I started working for a lot of the big tech companies in the US. It was really interesting and challenging work. I did a lot of vulnerability research, exploit development, attack simulations, as well as realistic red team engagements where I went up against their security teams. One of the engagement was with the company Dropbox, where I had been tasked with breaking in and attempt to take over their infrastructure with zero assistance. They were pretty happy with the results and actually decided to write about them, which is the only reason I can actually talk about this work with you today, which is kind of fun actually for me. It was really challenging, and because I had decided only to target engineering employees. Why? Because they have the most privileges. And standard phishing efforts weren't working. And if you want to kind of read about this work, you can scan the QR code and take a look at it. So I ended up developing custom capabilities where I discovered multiple 0 days, including a remote code execution vulnerability in the macOS operating system that I could then weaponize as a part of a custom attack path against Dropbox. Afterwards, I remember them saying that they thought it had been the Russians, which I thought was kind of funny considering where I'm from. And so that's what I did to hack into Dropbox. It worked really well, although they have a great security team. And they caught me pretty quickly once I started to move laterally within their infrastructure, which is commendable. I guess, though, that it's a bit crazy for an individual to develop capabilities like that just to target one US-based customer. But I was really dedicated to my work, and I loved a challenge. Sadly, though, most of my professional career has just been a grind. It's just being honest. Consulting gig into the next one, and never feeling like I was making any impact or doing anything really positive at all. So I wanted to make an impact and improve things, but the only thing I know how to do is to hack things. That's the only thing I know what to do. But that's when the consumer agency in Iceland asked us to take a look at so-called safety watches for children. Has anybody ever seen these things? That were being heavily marketed to parents in Iceland. They were really cheap, had a GSM and Wi-Fi modems, a microphone, a speaker, and were actively being sold as safety devices. Surely these things were safe, right? I guess you know where this is going. So the watches we took a look at had a GPS receiver and used a SIM card to constantly send and receive data through cell towers. The devices could be controlled via an app that happened to interact with a cloud service, which was an API hosted on Amazon that, for whatever reason, happened to be accessible without any authentication. Yeah. Every single method was accessible, and it contained all the information ever sent from all the watches, all the GPS coordinates, everything. And you could issue commands as well to the watches that would routinely poll this API. And you could gain full control over all the safety watches that use this API. That means location tracking, speaker, and you could even listen to the microphone whenever you wanted. And just how many devices were there? Well, we downloaded the GPS, at least the metadata from it, and we created a map based on those coordinates found via the API. And there were over 300,000 of these watches all over the world. And keep in mind that each one of those markers most likely represented a child. And we had full control over 300,000 of these so-called safety watches that tracked children's positions in near real time. Had a microphone you could listen to, had a speaker you could send messages to, and there was no authentication at all. That's crazy. This is Iceland. This is my community. And this is probably the reason why I'm here. And it's the place where my children live. On this map, you can see the children of Iceland that were using this so-called safety watch. We have less than 400,000 people in Iceland, and there were only 300 children in Iceland using this watch. But Iceland is a very tight-knit society, so this felt very, very personal to me. It actually made me angry to see this. Angry to see that we could track the movements of one of these children located in Reykjavik, our capital city. And it was extremely easy to see where a child lived based on the tracking data. Looking at the whole world, we saw over 300,000 of these children all over using this creepy product that had absolutely no security built into it. Isn't this pretty creepy and scary? But these are the times we're living in, with IoT and these extremely careless security practices. Just extremely careless. Yeah, as you can imagine, this didn't feel great, and it actually felt kind of disgusting. It wasn't a great feeling knowing this, and I wanted to see if I could have some sort of impact or make some sort of impact here, and hopefully use the hacking skills I had acquired in my youth as a force for good. That's the hope. We started to fight for full disclosure on this, working with the Icelandic Consumer Agency and their European counterparts. None of them really understood our technical report. I guess it was just too complicated, even though we thought it described the threat perfectly. But once we demoed it, like a real demo, proof of concept of tracking a child, they took it really seriously. And I mean seriously. As our hard work and proof of concept led to the first mass recall of such creepy devices by the European Commission. Yay. And it gave me hope that I could really apply the skills I had acquired to have an impact and affect positive change. And it felt great. It felt great. I'm sure a lot of people here can relate when you are able to contribute something positive. But alas, and this is kind of part and parcel of disclosure, is the vendor isn't always happy. Not in the slightest. In fact, they threatened to sue, and I personally received many threats over my career for doing things like this, and they disputed all of our findings, no matter what evidence we provided. And the truth is, security threats and vulnerabilities are just a part of our daily lives. We're constantly under attack in some way, and companies are getting hacked left and right. We know it's a human problem, but it's also a technical issue, as there are flaws, threats, vulnerabilities literally everywhere. It's just a part of our lives. There's nothing wrong with that, it's just a part of it. And these connected devices are also part of us, and quite literally on our bodies, and even inside our bodies sometimes. And the thing is, like with these creepy watches, there sometimes isn't even an attempt at security. Not even an attempt. I know this is not how the Drupal community works, not at all, but this is sometimes how it is. Thankfully, though, Yeah, as I mentioned, this isn't always the case. And we have methods to reduce risk. And yeah, I'm a hacker, and I really don't understand anything except code, systems, and vulnerabilities in them. I'm pretty much useless at everything else. And historically, the risk of vulnerabilities has been dealt with through something called vulnerability management. And who wouldn't want to manage vulnerabilities? Sounds smart, and something those watches definitely could have used. And in fact, there's a pretty huge industry centered around the concept of vulnerability management. It even sounds super smart, like I mentioned. The cyclical practice of identifying, classifying, prioritizing, and mitigating software vulnerabilities. I feel smarter just saying it. And surely, it must work pretty well. And it absolutely does reduce risk, absolutely. And yet, countless companies and institutions are getting hacked every day. Why is that? Well, apart from the human problem, which is always the hardest challenge, the fact is that the industry is primarily driven by tools created in the 90s, back when this idiot was starting out. That's kind of the sad state. Vulnerability scanners, at least the first ones, that's when they were developed. Yeah. And the threat model was a bit different. I'm sure there's people from the 90s here that remember how things used to be. Maybe you could say that it was simpler times, as the current model is very different in so many ways. And we all know that just we're using so many technologies that are combining over different areas, and it's just endless. So how do you aim and point and aim a vulnerability scanner on an ever-moving target? With difficulty, that's how. We don't keep things in one place. In fact, they're all over the place, on-prem, public cloud, private cloud, and who knows what. In addition, we're different people, and we use different products in the cloud. And this is all part of the modern threat model. And we know that despite this very good practice of vulnerability management, that companies are being hacked all over the world, all the time. Vulnerability management makes me secure. The idea that vulnerability management or automated scanning tools make anything secure is so far removed from the truth that it isn't even funny. Every self-respecting offensive hacker, malicious or not, knows this statement isn't even close to the truth. I'm jumping ahead here quite a bit, but to emphasize this point, I just wanted to point out that of all the vulnerabilities reported to Defend Iceland so far by our ethical hackers, less than 5% were known vulnerabilities, less than 5%. All the tools that are out there identify known vulnerabilities. For me, it does indicate that traditional vulnerability management is just scratching the surface of the underlying issue, which is that, and I'm sure everyone in here knows this, is that all software and systems contain vulnerabilities. It's just a fact of life. They just haven't been discovered yet. So what is a hacker really? And if you think about it, a hacker is just someone with a critical mindset, a love for solving technical puzzles, a curiosity that never quits. The MIT Hacker's Handbook describes hacking as a mindset, a way of seeing the world differently. It's effectively just about thinking outside the box. It's not inherently bad or good. It's about what you do with it. And so I personally think almost anyone can be a hacker if they're whether they're interested in breaking in or not. It has nothing to do with that. And the archetype that you see in the movies and on TV shows is not the real hacker. The truth is, hackers are all sorts of people. You could even say it's a spectrum of people with different knowledge and abilities, different interests and specialization, and most importantly, different morals and ethical boundaries. So, if vulnerability management doesn't really work, how are the malicious hackers breaking in? And why are most communities not using ethical hackers to help identify vulnerabilities? And that's when I was introduced to the concept of bug bounty. This was in 2019. Through a team building exercise at my company, Syndis, where an employee who was all in on bug bounties decided to show the rest of us how it worked and how bug bounty can tap into the skills and expertise of ethical hackers to find and report vulnerabilities and bugs. So what is it? It's an amazing concept. Millions of hackers out there all over the world finding and reporting bugs. Some of these hackers are incredibly gifted, solving problems that entire corporate teams might miss. Sounds great. I was thrilled. And they actually get paid for responsibly disclosing security vulnerabilities. Sign me up. And I had no experience with this whatsoever. And it was just a weekend team building exercise. But we needed to choose some targets. And AT&T looked pretty juicy to me. So did Starbucks, but I'll get back to that later. Let's hack them. So HackerOne is effectively the biggest and oldest bug bounty platform there is, and they have many public programs with big, rich companies like AT&T and Starbucks. At the time, we took a look at their directory, and as I mentioned, lots of reputable and powerful companies had a bug bounty program with them. It was pretty easy to sort based on how much bounty or money you could get for bugs. Which after all, and I have to be just perfectly honest there, that's what brought me there. I was interested in hacking ethically, but I only came for the bounty. And maybe a little had to do with a challenge of competing against my peers. And as I mentioned, we had picked AT&T. And why did we do that? Well, as I said, they're a juicy target. And they look like easy money to me. It's just my interpretation of that. This was in November of 2019, and in the previous 90 days, AT&T had received 4,356 reports of vulnerabilities. 4,356. And they seemed to be paying quite well, with close to $300,000 paid in bounties during that time, during those 90 days. Very interesting. Their program was pretty simple, and as they paid up to $2,000 for a critical vulnerability, for one instance of a vulnerability. Sounds great. So AT&T was the target, but as I mentioned, I had no experience with bug bounties, but I knew how to hack. I just needed some basic game plan so I could, with the least amount of work, find the bug and try to get the maximum bounty amount. I would only look for critical vulnerabilities, and this was my plan. It's not a genius level plan, it's pretty basic. I would just try to find all their top level domains. I would look for subdomains on each top level domain I discovered, and I would only look for web services and take screenshots of all the web services I could identify. And then I would just manually review the screenshots and look for websites that I thought were easy to hack or looked like a juicy target. Great. The results were pretty interesting. I had discovered over 100 top-level domains, well over 20,000 subdomains discovered, taken over 17,000 screenshots of different web applications. Can you imagine that? It's one company. And after reviewing them, I picked 64 targets for manual review. That's target selection. Everything, if you're an offensive hacker, this is what you think about, target selection. It's all about target selection. And one of the potential targets looked really interesting to me. Consolidated Network Operations Security Center. The website looked pretty ancient, and it just even sounded like a juicy target to me. Target selection done. But what is this website? Spoiler alert, it's not a Drupal site. It's Java-based. And it turns out the website was based on some product from the software developer BMC called Midtier, a proprietary Java-based platform. If this would have been an open source platform, these bugs would never have gone through, 100%. So anyways, I had decided to use a simple tool that just tries to find endpoints or URL paths on a website. It just scans like 5,000 requests a second or something like that. And the path rsys/shared had popped up. I had no idea what that meant or what service or product was using it. But I just Googled it, and an interesting thing popped up. A link to something called the exploit database. Interesting. From that, I just decided to Google whether a critical remote code execution vulnerability might be known in this product. I mean, why not? And lo and behold, there was a very recent, like a few months earlier, security advisory from BMC as the top result. The advisory had been issued 4 months prior, which is very interesting, but this is a known vulnerability, right? And surely AT&T have fixed it by now. Surely. They have vulnerability management. And there even is a CVE number in there. There's maybe some security geeks in here that will relate, but yeah. But so any self-respecting vulnerability scanner should be able to identify this vulnerability, right? Let's see if they were vulnerable. And just by asking the server, it showed the version it was running, including the patch number. And turns out they hadn't updated since 2017. Yeah. Sorry, my timing is off. Like I was working on this talk this morning. So what gives? What gives? Well, it's this strange thing. You can reserve a CVE number, but you don't have to put in any technical details. There's no requirement for that. They were all just in the security advisory from the vendor, which actually was a great security advisory, but nobody, presumably, nobody at AT&T had ever seen that security advisory. All the scanning tools, the CVE details are the Bible. That's what they base their scans on, to properly identify vulnerabilities. And so that's why I believe none of the sophisticated vulnerability scanners out there could find this vulnerability, even though it was already known. This was not a zero-day vulnerability. But the security advisory was great. The patch notes were good, and the patches themselves kind of revealed the bugs. I just needed to reverse engineer the patch and figure out how to build my exploit chain. A technical challenge for sure. So it's definitely something that I was interested in. It turned out to be pretty complicated to build the exploit chain as it required multiple steps in order to gain code execution. I'm not going to go into all the details on that, but I will just highlight the topics here. But in essence, I need to use several vulnerabilities and chain them together to build a reliable exploit chain to run code as either root or admin privileges. Yeah, with very high privileges on the operating system. And in bug bounty, this is bug bounty that we're talking about, it's all about proving impact. And so that's exactly what I did. And here's the proof. This is for Starbucks. The service is no longer running. That's, yep. But I submitted the proof to both AT&T and Starbucks, demonstrating I had full control over these particular servers running in their infrastructure. And this felt to me like hacking back in the day. But I was doing it ethically. Like I was trying to make the company more secure and getting a bounty as well. And I got this huge rush that I remember when I was 15 to 18. In addition, I sent in my technical report, and I end up getting 2 rewards from AT&T for critical vulnerabilities. As I mentioned, I also submitted to Starbucks. I got $4,000 for 1 bug there. But as I mentioned, Starbucks wasn't originally the target. They were not the target. AT&T was the juicy target. I hadn't even looked at their program. I looked at it for like a minute or two before I submitted the report. So why did I submit to them? Well, after I had written my exploit, the hard work was already done. All the technical hardship, I guess, was done. I just decided afterwards to see who else was running this piece of software from BMC. How many could this impact? Maybe some other company had a bug bounty in place. And when I Googled it, the product, I just used a Google keyword in title to find most of the instances of the software running, and Starbucks popped up. And as I mentioned, they were never the target. I just wanted the bounty. I also knew from the HackerOne directory that they had a public bug bounty, and they paid higher rewards. And yeah, because I just wanted more bounty for the hard work I had done. Great, more money. Not bad for a weekend of fun. Okay, but afterwards, I had this lingering thought. What about everyone else? What about everyone else? When I had Googled to look for other companies that had a bug bounty, I saw lots and lots of companies all over the world, thousands of companies running this same software that I could break into at that point in time. But I only cared about reporting to those with a disclosure program, and to be completely honest, only to those with a bug bounty program. And after that, I had felt that rush of doing this against AT&T, I suppose some level of greed snuck up on me, and I was just thinking about the potential of a bounty. That's the only thing that I was thinking about. I'll admit that. And I remember thinking at the time when I was kind of debating this is, it felt like I was a mercenary. I was only working for those that were willing to pay me. Well, it felt that way to me at least. And so what about everyone else? There were a lot of companies using this product and institutions, and one caught my eye at the time because it kind of felt close to us Icelanders. We were once ruled by this country. And I had noticed the Danish military was also running this software. Keep in mind, this is back in 2019. Hasn't everyone updated and patched their systems since then? It's been 5 years. What do you think? Surely. No. And before this talk, and actually in the beginning of this year, I sent them the detailed report on this, notified them of this. And before this talk, I was hoping to do like it's been fixed. But that's, yeah. This is a known vulnerability. The vendor released a security advisory back in 2019. And that's just how it is. Not great. And yeah, it's not a great feeling knowing this kind of stuff. And it didn't feel right, knowing how amazing bug bounty was, but only for the select few. It really gave me a bitter taste in my mouth after this experience. I felt that bug bounty only worked for those with near unlimited resources. And as an ethical hacker, or at least one striving to be, this did remind me of kind of a mercenary business where these ethical hackers, millions and millions of them, were just hired guns. Surely we can do better. I started to ask myself, how can I fix this? I thought about community, what it means to belong to one, and to care for one. Iceland is my community. It's the one I belong to and I care for, and the one that gave me all of my opportunities and privilege. What if we could tap into the ethical hackers in our community? What if we were more than one? At Syndis, we were a bunch of like-minded ethical hackers, and we were always finding the same bugs, the same exploits, over and over in our community. Nothing was changing. So we thought we could fix that. And a short story that I want to tell you about is the Icebreaker project. And it came about because over time, we had found a way to bypass authentication at scale, affecting almost all digital services in our country. It was like turning a light on in a dark room. We could see everything and we wanted to fix it. We could make a difference, and we did. And just to give you like the highlights, I'm not going to go into any of the details. Iceland.is is a central identity provider and an authentication service used for almost everything in Iceland. Logging into your health data, all digital services, banks, companies, almost everyone uses it. And you would just visit the website that would transfer you to the authentication provider. Then you would log in with your credentials and the authentication method they provided, whereby you would get a SAML message and a token, which contained your signed assertion proving you are who you say you are, which your browser would then send to the website you were originally attempting to log into. It was based on SAML and used by companies and institutions which needed to implement it properly and securely, one would hope. Because there was nothing fundamentally wrong with the authentication system, it was just the implementation. And I'm sure there are people here that are used to integrating with authentication systems, and I'm not going to cover that. But in essence, SAML is just an open standard for authentication based on XML. Typically, an end user will authenticate to an intermediary who generates the assertion to prove that it has authenticated the user. In our case, the intermediary was Iceland.is, and they did most things correctly, and the same cannot be said for everyone else. There were a number of flaws. I'm sure this is a common GIF that people are using. And oftentimes you could just tell the website you are Batti or some other Icelander, and you could log in as you. You could use this for every Icelander. This was very, very common. And the website would just accept the verification or the assertion without any kind of actual verification happening in the background. No questions asked, and you could access a person's digital services. Almost no security at all. Sounds familiar? I remember a new employee starting at Syndis at the time, and we were doing a security assessment for a new customer. It was a bank, and the employee who was supposed to do that assessment asked me about it and said they were using this identity provider for their authentication. I remember saying casually to this employee that the authentication was most likely broken and could be bypassed for all their customers. And it turns out that was correct, but I remember thinking just how casually I'd said that. It's just too casual. And I was taken aback a little bit, and as a result of kind of that experience, we decided we wanted to try to fix this somehow. And we developed Icebreaker, which was a tool which would automate over a dozen ways signature wrapping, your own signature or even no signature at all. Lots of ways we had identified over the years we could bypass this. But before we started, we knew that almost all digital services in Iceland used this nationwide provider, and we had an idea that the situation wasn't great, but we really had no idea. We were able to sell the tool. We actually sold this tool to 12 of the biggest digital service providers in our country that had the means to pay for the assessment and the report. These were websites that contained very sensitive information and private data, such as health data and our finances. And we could very easily bypass the authentication in 9 out of 12, out of the biggest service providers in our country. Yeah, not a great feeling knowing this, but for these 12, it was pretty easy fix. You just need to fix the code. Lots of issues were created and things were remediated. But what about everyone else? And that kind of comes back to this point. There were over 600 other companies and organizations, including many non-profits, that used the same authentication portal. What about them? Was it possible to bypass authentication on some of them? And so we just decided, fuck it. We'll just run it on all of them and responsibly disclose the reports to them all. And when we ran the tool for the first time, we could bypass authentication for more than half of them, over 60% of all digital systems the people in our country used. This included Drupal websites that had integrated to this particular identity provider. Not a great situation, but we disclosed responsibly, which we thought was great, and we weren't asking for any bounty. There was no bounty, we weren't asking for anything for this. We just wanted to have a positive impact, and we did. It turns out, but during that process, it just turns out that disclosure is really hard, especially if you're coordinating it with many people, many companies. It's just really hard. And to illustrate that point, it took us 2 years to fix this. From when we sent them the reports until we actually were able to remediate properly, or at least less bugs. Some people never fix their bugs. That's just how it is. Yeah, it was just an endless headache to get this properly remediated, and not something that makes any sense for a consultancy doing pro bono work. But eventually we went from we can bypass everything for almost everything to we can fix everything eventually. And this was great. It kind of gave me a little bit of meaning in my work and a feeling that I had contributed to something positive in our community. But as I mentioned, it turns out that vulnerability disclosure is not that coordinated and definitely not effective at all. Working with the government agencies and companies on this was a true nightmare. Some people were hostile, some people threatened. And yeah, that's just how it was in Iceland. And who's even responsible for this? And that's when, I guess, a crazy idea hit us. What if we just do it? Take ownership of this responsibility and give the power to the ethical hacker community. I won't wait for the bureaucrats to catch up with the real world. I would just do it. I would set this up for our country where everything would be in scope. You could submit a bug for everything. I would also try to solve the issues I had faced with coordinated disclosure and like bug bounties that seem to only work for those with immense means and resources. What if we could defend Iceland using the ability and interest of ethical hackers and IT professionals from our community that share the common goal of wanting to make it more safe and secure? The idea grew from that first bug bounty experience and the limitations that I had noted into thinking that responsible disclosure was a critical part of any digital community. A critical part. That's what I believe. Responsible disclosure just has to be there. And I wrote a detailed memo about my ideas of coordinated disclosure on a national scale to the government. And although everyone I spoke with was well-meaning and shared the same goals, they just thought I was crazy. And the idea was crazy. Hack the country. Are you crazy? It was a no after a no after a no. I can't count the number of no's, but I remember being encouraged by mostly technical people that maybe saw errors, saw flaws in the idea, but they liked the concept and they wanted to contribute. And so that's the reason why I didn't give up on the idea. And it actually led me to apply for a first innovation grant, which failed to get support. And we decided, as a result of that, to brand the initiative as Hack Iceland, because it felt accurate. At least what we were trying to achieve. And we wrote additional grant proposals for that project that, although did better than the first, didn't receive any grants. But during that process, kind of the vision was fleshed out of safer digital communities and how we can create more positive security culture. Then we finally managed to get the government on board in some capacity as we signed a letter of intent with a national CERT team in Iceland. At the same time, I learned about the Digital Europe Plan from the European Commission, and in particular, a call called the Uptake of Innovative Cybersecurity Solutions that I thought was absolutely perfect for this initiative. We then tried to partner with the Icelandic government, but they were afraid of the word hack. Apparently, it does have a negative connotation to most people. Maybe not in this room, but for certain in government. I did, however, continue on and start writing an EU grant proposal at the end of 2022. And then we partnered with both of the major universities in Iceland, and we rebrand the project as Defend Iceland, because after all, that's what we're trying to achieve. We're just trying to achieve it through ethical hackers. After that, it turned out to be pretty easy once we renamed it to get support from the government. And then we submitted our grant proposal to the EU in March of 2023. And later that year, we managed, in our fourth attempt, to get the grant application approved by the Icelandic Innovation Fund. And I'd just like to say to anyone who's in innovation and has gone down the grant route and getting denied, just never give up. It's just one of those things. It's, just take it as a room to improve type of thing. And then we get the grant from the European Commission. And it's a sizable grant. It's 2.5 million euros via the Digital Europe Plan. This gave us so much credibility in Iceland, you can imagine, that we could convince the reviewers at the European Cybersecurity Competence Center that our idea had merit and that Iceland could be a smart place to test this idea out. Talk about a game changer in the reception we got, literally overnight. And the result, we managed to secure widespread support from industry and government. We didn't even have the money yet, just the fact that we got the grant and the support and the belief. And then we put together a great team that's building and launching this initiative, and we realize we're super small, but we're just starting out and we're growing. And there's actually 3 of us here. It's me, Hjörtur, and Hugrún, and it's been a great pleasure for us to learn more about the Drupal community. And the team was able to launch our nationwide bug bounty program in March of this year, which is designed for our community to empower ethical hackers and IT professionals that care about it and want to help defend it, our community. So I had mentioned that I had gotten a bitter taste through my experience with bug bounty in the past. The fact that it's pretty much only suited for those with immense resources. How in the world can you create some sustainable incentives to those that report vulnerabilities to all affected parties? Not just the 12 paying customers, but the 600 who aren't. How do you create that incentive? And it's pretty tricky, I think, and that's the real problem. You just don't have them for the small to medium organizations and nonprofits, at least not in a sustainable way. As I noted, we launched earlier this year, but we already have lots and lots of customers that each one pays up to $3,500 for a critical vulnerability. That's kind of the upper limit of a critical vulnerability for us. We have the entire banking sector in our country on board. They have lots of money. We have almost all the public digital services in the country are on board. Almost all the public health sector is on board. And almost the entire power grid, all the utility companies are already in there. And we aim to get a critical mass of large enterprises as paying customers, this is the key, into a program that can help us sustain something we think is a game changer. And it's a communal reward system, funded by those with means, but intended for everyone else, either those that don't have any resources or those that have just a complete lack of awareness. The community fund will be run as a non-profit trust inspired by Drupal and governed by our community of ethical hackers. And for me personally, this is where I think we can learn. We're just starting out where we can learn from the Drupal community. It's a great example that we're looking towards. The fund is designed to tap into the social responsibility of organizations and companies with a means to fund their own reward systems, but this willingness to help fund a community fund that's designed for the society as a whole, to help defend our community. They pay a 10% flat fee on top of any bounty reward issued to an ethical hacker, which goes directly into the communal fund. And something beautiful happened, at least to me, it's beautiful. When we launched this, and when we kind of disseminated this to our community of ethical hackers about the communal fund and its purpose, they, on their own accord, started asking whether they could donate parts of their rewards directly to the communal fund. It's great. Talk about hacker social responsibility. For me, this is great to see. And it actually gave me goosebumps to see that happen organically, without direct influence, and motivates me to keep going with this project, including presenting here, which I have to tell you is way outside of my comfort zone. So who is this community fund intended for? Well, as I mentioned, it's potentially for everyone else, but mostly the small to medium and the non-profits. Those are the ones that don't have the resources for security. It's hard. You have lots of other things you need to do. And it's a way to encourage our ethical hackers to report all instances of a vulnerability in our society, no matter who it affects. We just want our community to be as secure as possible. This is the hope of this project, and why I personally think it can work where traditional bug bounty will only work for the few. Just a real example here of how a critical vulnerability that was discovered recently in a bank and how that affected this communal fund. An ethical hacker that we call Defenders identified a vulnerability in that bank, and the bank then decided to give the defender a bounty of 500,000 Icelandic krona, which is about $3,500, which to them might be peanuts, to the bank, that is, for something that could otherwise have been a game over scenario for them. On top of that, because of the communal fund, they added an additional payment, which is the communal reward fund, of 50,000 ISK into the fund, which we think is a good example of how they can show corporate social responsibility. They can have an impact. In the example I mentioned, the hacker, that defender, was also really happy with the reward and decided to match the donation by the bank with an additional 50,000 Icelandic krona coming from the defender's rewards. That meant, just from this one vulnerability, almost $1,000 into the fund. It's not a lot of money yet, but, and as I mentioned, we're just starting out. And these numbers are peanuts, I realize that, but they're growing every day. We updated these numbers like 3 or 4 times just a couple of days, these 2 days we were here. And this is working, and over time, we hope that we can seed this communal reward fund so that we can manage the amount of vulnerabilities we receive affecting our society. We know we need a lot more into it. We will do that by hacking our country and making it more secure over time. We currently have around 100 ethical hackers as part of our local community. Iceland is a small place, so 100 is kind of a lot. Most of them had never heard about bug bounties before, never. Some work as developers for our customers, and they were just interested in that in what we were trying to achieve. And I just want to mention one of our most productive ethical hackers. He did DevSecOps and had never participated in bug bounties or done any offensive security work. And he's one of our most productive. And so you don't really need an experience. You just need the mindset and the willingness to contribute. We know this isn't a large amount yet, but we're just starting and we need to start somewhere. So, yeah. And so with this community fund in place, our hackers can report bugs affecting any organization in Iceland, even if they don't have a bug bounty program with us. We will then responsibly disclose the bug to that organization and therefore hopefully make them more safe and secure. Okay. Before this keynote, a couple of minutes left, we thought about how our small community could help contribute to the Drupal community in some way. It's really, and our head of community, Hjörtur, who's right there, he's very tall, just look out for him, decided to see if he could find vulnerabilities in contributed modules in Drupal. This is not a full account of that, and we just wanted to share our methodology and way of thinking today. We started by exploring the Drupal ecosystem as outsiders. We're outsiders. To better understand the scope and potential of vulnerabilities within contributed modules, which we identified pretty quickly was a very, very likely attack vector for any attacker. Our approach involved cloning the entire repository of 38,928 modules from git.drupalcode.org, totaling 575 gigabytes of source code. Now, while Drupal on the website lists 52,268 modules, we were only able to pull 38,000 from the repository. We're not entirely sure why there's a gap, but something we noticed during the data collection process, and I'd love to know what explains this discrepancy after the talk, if anybody knows. But this gave us access to a large portion of the module landscape, allowing us to identify and analyze potential security vulnerabilities. Once the modules were cloned, we used a basic tool called semgrep, which is a static code analysis tool, to analyze the source code of each of the modules for vulnerabilities. This tool allowed us to quickly sift through the massive code base, highlighting potential vulnerabilities. However, raw vulnerabilities weren't enough. We needed context. To understand the potential impact of these vulnerabilities, we needed to enrich the data by scraping project sites. This provided us with insights into how many sites were using each module and whether those modules were under security monitoring. The enriched data was then loaded into the data analysis, which helped us to map out the areas of high interest. From an attacker's perspective, one of the most significant insights for us is that 80% of the modules flagged for potential vulnerabilities are not covered by the Drupal security advisory policy, which, by the way, seems to work really well. And these modules are accessible to the Drupal community, but aren't a part of this formal advisory process, which could make them appealing targets. I might even call them juicy, due to the possibility of vulnerable and exploitable code. Additionally, according to statistics collected on the Drupal module sites, 8,670 sites were using these modules. In fact, this is where I think we would focus our efforts on if we were malicious. It's likely that there are low-hanging fruit issues there. oh, sorry. If an adversary were planning an attack against the Drupal ecosystem, these modules might be an interesting place to focus attention and efforts. At least that's an outsider's perspective. And just to say it here, because it's extremely commendable to us just how well the Drupal security team seems to cover the modules that are part of the Drupal security advisory policy. And I'm just going to say, because we like a challenge, but we couldn't identify any low-hanging fruit issues in supported modules. And the same cannot be said for WordPress, which underwent a similar exercise recently and didn't fare as well with their plugins. Yeah. And as I mentioned, we hope that the full data set, we accumulated, it's accessible to the security team. We'd love to share it. There's no strings, just we want to help contribute in some way. Most hackers, I should say, hackers are people too, right? Are good people with good morals. They care about whatever community they belong to. They aren't interested in finding vulnerabilities to conduct ransomware attacks or launch any kind of scam. Ethical hackers find flaws or bugs because they think it's fun, it's a challenge or a puzzle, and they, like any good member of a community, want to affect positive change and hopefully, in our case, build more secure digital spaces. I just want to be ultra clear that we're just starting out. And we only officially launched our initiative this year. And we don't pretend that we've solved anything. We're just starting out, which is why it's great to see a community that's been building for over 20 years. We just hope to make our community more safe, and we realize we have this long road ahead of us. The Drupal community and the way it governs its community, including how effective its security team is, and for me personally, just how well it monitors contributed modules, is a huge example, as well as an inspiration to us on how we can build up our community of ethical hackers. They might start coming for the bug bounty, but we hope they stay for the community. Thank you.
So, a lot of your story had various pivotal moments between the accident and then getting into hacking because you had the spare time and then getting arrested. And I feel like I always love people's backstories because even my own, I didn't think I'd be a developer, and I'm sure you didn't see any of this coming.
No, for sure.
What were some other, like, those moments you look back and, like, there was that one moment and holy cow, it changed everything?
Well, I mean, getting arrested was one, but I do remember in, like, I think it was 2001, 2, around that time, a friend of mine, a great friend of mine, was arrested and put in jail, federal prison in the US. Not a joke. And it was just, either I'm going to go in that direction, just an idiot, or I pivot. And so I think for me that was kind of a big moment. And also just starting my own company because I wanted to change something. I wanted to affect something positive with my work. At least that was the hope.
Oh, awesome. If anyone has questions, the mics are open, and also in the attendee app, you can find the session, and there's a live Q&A to submit a question. We do have some that came in, and to segue from that, like the pivotal moment that brought you here, what advice would you give to somebody who wants to start a career in cybersecurity besides getting arrested?
Well, I mean, there's so many outlets today that didn't exist when I was starting out. I mean, you have Hack the Box, you have like Portswigger, you have endless videos that are useful, and you have virtual environments you can play in, virtual playgrounds, and you have CTFs. I work a lot in Iceland with the CTF community, which for Iceland, actually, if anyone's gone to DEF CON, 2 members of the main CTF team, they won a black badge there, which is pretty impressive. So I think participate in grassroots stuff. I think that would be kind of where it's at. And if you're part of another community and you want to bring security into that community, it's just trying to figure out how you can apply those skills towards your community. I think, yeah, that's how I would.
All right, there was another one. What can you tell about hacking and geopolitics? Like, how big is the threat to European democracy?
Wow.
Yeah, this is a deep one. But going into like the threat of hacking and, I guess, the modern climate.
I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, we can see it. We can see that you have pagers exploding. You have software Trojans that can take over phones with zero touch. I mean, it's a scary business. The exploit development business is actually disgusting. That is a terrible business where you're a hacker and you're selling an exploit for an iPhone, for instance. For me, I think governments today, they don't hesitate to use these things to their whatever political purposes they're using, and obviously with false narratives, we see that all the time as well.
You brought up about how the Drupal security team
Yep.
is unique and sets a high standard. Do you think there's a way that can be replicated for other open source communities? Like, or is there a way to possibly do like a standard?
I mean, I think all open source communities should look towards Drupal and the way that they're doing it. I mean, WordPress, for instance. And so I think, I think definitely it's a good example of how it could be done at a really big scale. I mean, as far as I'm aware, there's millions of people, over 1 million people, a part of the Drupal community. That's a lot. And so for sure.
Just making sure. Just one, do you think organizations having their own bug bounty program is more effective, or is joining networks for visibility more effective?
So I think it's a question I can't really answer. It just depends.
Yeah.
And so for us in Iceland, we have a nationwide bug bounty mandate. It doesn't mean every company in the country is going to have a bug bounty program with us. We're just willing to receive vulnerabilities for everyone and then disseminate through responsible disclosure to everyone affected. So I think we're trying to be a security team, I guess, for the country, and I think we'll copy the advisory policy from Drupal, I'm sure.
When it comes to the ethical hacking, let's say you start to probe and you're looking, what do you do to help, like, what if the police are notified, and how do you let the company know, oh, hold on, I wasn't being nefarious, I was actually doing ethical hacking and doing your bug bounty program? You have to stand on your principle, and you don't cross the line. There's a line somewhere, obviously, and it's a gray area, but cause no harm. I think prove the vulnerability and the potential impact, but no further. That's kind of where I think the boundary is for me. And if I've done it that way, I'm not afraid of the threats. Here's some funny ones I want to bring up. So hackers usually have hoodies on.
Yep.
And you don't have a hoodie today.
I have a lot of them. So I think there's a different stereotype for hackers. I don't even have stickers on my computer, so it's sorry.
And this one, so I thought of this also when I saw the QR codes on the slides.
Yep.
Are they safe, or are they redirecting to phishing sites?
I mean, it could be a phishing site. No, it's not safe. It could be a zero-touch exploit, and all your phones are infected now. At least the people that visit Italy, but no, not in my case, at least. But I understand the reservations.
So as a maintainer of a bunch of Drupal code, and I wanted to write secure code, I know the Drupal community has some standards, but where could myself as an open source maintainer learn more about cybersecurity and writing better code, so that way I'm doing my own ethical duty of, if people use 1,000 sites have my code, I want that to be secure.
Personally, I like the OWASP Top 10, and there's something called Portsöker, which provides labs that show how a vulnerability in code can in fact can affect a system where you can understand the vulnerability a little bit more. And I think just take it seriously. But the problem with security vulnerabilities oftentimes is you receive maybe an issue, just not a real vulnerability. So oftentimes people are confusing real vulnerabilities with not so real vulnerabilities. But each developer, I think, has their own personal responsibility to have some understanding of how to write more secure code. Yes. Not perfect, nobody's perfect, but yeah.
All right, here's another one that's a bit kind of fun, because there's the video game and movie versions of hackers and the real life one. So they wonder if you've ever played the game Watch Dogs, the Watch Dogs series, and your thought on...
I have not, but I've heard about it. So
I know it's a hacker. I've never played it either. I know it's a hacker game.
Yeah, but it's very common to see that played. But I mean, I come from Iceland, and the hacker community there is pretty small. And what we did, we just we went out eating together. That was kind of our yeah, that was our thing, and drinking beer.
Yeah. Here's a question: what worries you most about getting your personal device to hack? Is it when you add third-party packages while writing code? If there was a supply chain hack and you did npm install and now you have a...
I mean, I'd be worried about that. That's for sure. I mean, we know that people are always putting in backdoors in these open repositories and package managers, and I would be worried about it for sure. Mm-hmm. But thankfully, we have good security teams that hopefully monitoring for that. But yeah, it's not something you should take for granted. It's important that people that actually monitor this kind of stuff for us.
No, there's no one sending that. Oh. So here's another one. How much do you love the movie War Games?
I love it. To me, this is where I first got an interest in computer hacking. Obviously, Hackers 2, Hack the Planet, and all that. But War Games, it's one of my favorite movies.
I have to go watch it now because I have actually no idea what that movie is.
Yeah.
Do we have anyone that wants to come up and ask a question?
Thank you so much, DrupalCon. It's been a pleasure to be with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Awesome.
Thank you.
Great, you did awesome.